A few years ago, my boss went on holiday for a couple of weeks to Spain. Midway through the holiday, he got a phone call from the police informing him that his sister had passed away in a fire in her flat. So he rushes back home early, deals with the police in the event and everything. My employers told him to take some time off to grieve, which he duly did. When he came back to work on a Monday morning, a few weeks later, we invited him into our coffee room to talk and offer him our sympathies and support. About half an hour later, he excuses himself to start work. He walks into his office, sits down at his desk, turns on his computer, and checks to see if there are any answered phone messages. And the very first message that plays is his sister, screaming down the phone, "Help me. Help me. I'm trapped, I can't breathe." Still sends chills down my spine to think about it. As you can imagine, he was pretty traumatized. I was an RA in a dorm for 2 years in college. A girl who had been having stress issues finally snapped. She was found by someone in a dark stairwell. I was in an older dorm, circa 1887, so there were plenty of nooks and crannies. By the time she was found, she had already torn out over half of her hair and had eaten it. She just kept on saying, "I just need a haircut," in a perfectly normal voice. It took 6 of us and the police sedating her to finally get her strapped down to an ambulance gurney. To this day, I can't forget how powerful she was. She couldn't have weighed over 120 pounds, yet she had this sort of superhuman ability to rip her arms away to tear out another clump of hair and stuff it into her mouth. All with a perfectly straight face. Finding a woman who had committed suicide by hanging herself from the monkey bars of a park, I used to work at 6:15 on a very foggy morning. When I got to the gate of the park to open it, I could see her 100 yards away at the playground and thought she was just standing there looking at the ground with her umbrella. On the ground beside her, it was only when I got closer did I realize she was hanging from a jump rope 6 inches off the ground. My voice was very shaky during my 911 call. The dispatcher asked me to touch her to see if she was cold. She was very cold and very wet. It had been raining all night. The screwed up part is this park is very close to an elementary school and the parking lot is a popular place to drop kids off at, and it was a weekday. If you've ever been to Portland, or you know that our public transportation system is pretty nice, and the MAX system has a tram that runs between the airport and the city center until fairly late at night. I was coming home from seeing my family at Christmas, and my flight came in very late, so I was lucky enough to catch the last MAX home. Because it was so late, it was just me, and a guy who looked homeless sitting a few seats ahead of me. He was sleeping with his head against the window. I paid little attention to him, but noticed his head lolling around and wondered if he was wasted. Anyway, we get to the city center, and there are cops waiting there because apparently the homeless guy sitting in front of me is being escorted off the tram. Airport security had tried to get him off before and thought he was ignoring them and refusing to move. And that's when both the cops and I find out that the guy had been the whole time. He had overdosed at some point before the MAX had even arrived at the airport. We had been riding on that dark midnight ride alone together with one of us fairly deceased. Around 1980, a single mother of a toddler, Dorothy Jane Scott, started getting threatening phone calls at work. She paid the calls little attention until one night when the ominous voice on the other end of the line instructed her to look outside. On her car's windscreen was a single withered rose. The stalker would alternate between declaring his love for her and making threats of physical harm. The caller's voice sounded familiar, but Dorothy couldn't place who it was, and she never got to find out. At a staff meeting, Dorothy noticed that one of her coworkers appeared unwell. She and another coworker took the man to a neighboring hospital. Dorothy went outside to the parking lot while her two coworkers waited for the prescription to be filled. She wasn't seen again after that. According to her coworkers' testimony, they went outside to meet her in the parking lot after she didn't return. They suspected a problem had occurred with her son when they spotted her car rushing away as soon as they left the building. Neither her son nor anyone else ever saw or heard from Dorothy again. Her burned remains were discovered at a construction site 4 years later. The discovery of a collection of dog bones next to her remains added even more confusion to the case. No one has ever been found guilty or detained on suspicion. The caller has never been located. In 2015, the Bretsuis family in Auburn, Pennsylvania, wanted to insulate their home. While doing so, they soon discovered that their wall cavity had been used to store dozens of deceased animal carcasses, half-used spices, and other items. Other than that, the deceased animals were all wrapped in newspapers from the 1930s and 40s. After discovering all the deceased animals, the family sent the artifacts to a specialist to learn why someone would leave them in the house's walls. The expert claimed that the previous owner was most likely using Dutch magic, often known as powwowing, to treat ailments. The Bretsuis family still doesn't know by whom or why animal carcasses were stuffed into the house's walls. They also claimed that the mold on the decaying corpses in their home made them sick and that the odor just wouldn't go away.
I was 15 minutes from finishing the night shift at work when there was a massive crash on one of the windows in the office. So I get up and go check it out. Someone has thrown quite a sizable rock through one of the windows on the front of the building. This is weird, especially because I'm working in the industrial district at 11:30 at night with none of the other businesses open. I got back to my desk, have a quick call through to security to let them know, and decide to head home. As I'm leaving the building, I'm freaking myself out about it more and more and end up running to my car, getting in and taking off. I'm almost home and all started to calm down a bit, when I realized that I didn't unlock my car when I got in. It had been unlocked. I do a quick check with my hand in the back seat for any possible murderers that might be hanging around there, but there's nothing there. Fast forward about 30 minutes. I called a friend of mine, who says he's out drinking, so I said I'm gonna join him on my bicycle and start riding over. I'm doodling along the road on my bike. It's nice night and no big rush, just enjoying the moonlight, when I hear someone riding behind me. I straighten up and stick to one side of the road. He passes me really slowly, and when he's right beside me, he shoots me a smile, and I can describe it as purely insane. I kind of flinch and taken it back as he rides on. That's when I realize he's riding my bike. Needless to say, I rush the hell home, and when I get there, sure enough, my bike is missing and one of my car doors open, the back left one. I was driving and had no need to open the door. I was always the last kid to get picked up by the bus driver to go to school. One day, I was waiting for the bus by myself, and a bus with no kids pulled up. The bus driver smiled and told me to hop on. I just had a bad feeling. I said, "Where are the other kids?" He said, "We will go get them now, just get on." He got more and more pushy, but didn't do anything crazy. I just kept saying no, when he shrugged and left. The real school bus pulled up a few minutes later. I went to school and my parents didn't know, until I mentioned it that night. Looking back, they were pretty worried. I remember them scrambling to make a few phone calls. We never found out who this creepy bus driver was, who wanted to pick up random kids. But I'm glad I was clever enough not to get on the bus that day. I worked at a campground on night shift 12 a.m. to 8 a.m. every night. It wasn't bad. I would bring in my game, and a good portion of the night I was just playing. Only having to deal with 1 or 2 people on busy nights. It was just me in this little 8-foot by 8-foot with nothing around but dark all night. The other shift guy, who was quitting, told me about this payphone a few feet from the shack where I worked. He said it rang every night at 4:20 a.m. just once. It was probably just an automated test call, he said. He's never answered it himself. I go for a few months with the job. It was the middle of the summer, so most nights I had the windows closed so I couldn't hear the payphone go off. In August I started leaving the windows open during the night at 4 a.m. every morning. The phone would ring once. The ring even sounded creepy, like the payphone was submerged in water and then put where it sat. I got the nerve to answer it. I set an alarm at 4:15 and would wait at the phone. It rang when it did and I answered it. But there was no sound, just dead, like someone was on the other line but wasn't answering. I said hello a few times and hung up. I did this every night for a week with the same results. I didn't think of it and left it alone after that for about a month. The first week of October I answered the phone once again. I set my alarm and it came to answer. The phone repeatedly said, what sounded like inhaling through clenched teeth that sounded rough and sounded like he had gargled gravel. He said my name, my full name, first, middle and last. It was a voice I've never heard. I rattled some change into payphone and hit 69. The call had come from California. I lived in Indiana. Till this day, I have no idea who I was talking on the phone. Last night, a friend rushed me out of the house to catch up on a party to the local bar's music night after a few drinks. I realized my phone wasn't in my pocket. I checked the table we were sitting at the bar, the bathrooms, and after no luck, I used my friend's phone to call mine. After 2 rings, someone answered and gave out a big laugh and hung up. They didn't answer again. I eventually gave it up as a lost cause and was heading home. In the meantime, I figured, somebody must have broken into my home. So I called the police, because I was too scared to enter my own house. When I got home, the police was waiting for me there. So they went and checked everything, but couldn't find anyone there. I found my phone laying on my nightstand right where I left it. There were no prints on it. I have no idea who made the call till this day.